Good morning, everyone. My name is Marcus Placona. I'm an Android GDE. I'm also a Play GDE and an IoT GDE for Android. I also happen to work for a company called Twilio. I don't know, has anyone not heard about Twilio here? Cool, okay, so I get to say what Twilio is. Twilio is a communications API for developers that helps developers adding things like SMS messages, telephone calls, chat, video, emails into the applications you're already building. We have a ton of SDKs for Android and iOS and also web. So if you need any kind of communications in your apps, then you can go ahead and just add that into your applications. But I'm not here to talk about Twilio today, so don't worry. If you do have any questions about Twilio later on, just come and talk to me. I'll be around both days. But I wanted to start by telling you a story, okay? And this is a story, so this is me here. But this is a story that goes back to 2017. So because we're talking about tech years, it's more like this. And back in 2017, here's again the young Marcus. And young Marcus is building applications that look much like this, okay? So in this case, I was working on a game, and I was keeping all my game states and everything inside the application. I'm sure you've seen something like this before. This is just the save instance state, where if you have strings or anything, you can just chuck those into save instance state. And we've been doing this for a while. Like, we've done this for many, many, long years, and I'm sure some people are still doing that right now. But the other thing I was also working on is I was working on a camera application, okay? And has anyone worked in camera applications like Camera 2, something like that? Yeah, so working with camera applications is very easy, right? So easy that the first thing that when you start working with the camera application, you look at something like this. So, you have your activities, you have your text reviews, and then you have your camera. And it's so easy that I feel like I can describe the whole process to you. And, if you've never done this before, you're totally going to learn how to do it now. So you create the camera manager, then you set up the camera ID, then you set up the camera outputs, then you set up the transformation matrix to the text review, then you start a background thread, then you open a connection to the camera with a given ID. And then you set up the image buffer size to the text review, then you start the camera module, and then finally you start the camera preview. Does that give anyone else anxiety here? So that's exactly what I was doing, okay? So using Camera 2 back then, that's exactly the kind of code I was writing, okay? Now, when Google I/O came in, so this was Google I/O 2017, it kind of changed everything, because at Google I/O 2017, they announced architecture components. And they made that announcement, and I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. Like, I kind of get the idea of what they're trying to do. So architecture components later came to become part of Jetpack, the Jetpack family, but we'll talk about this in a second. So I remember watching that keynote, and I have a clipping of the video here of the keynote, and I remember looking at Mike Claren, and Mike Claren was talking about things like scalability. Mike Claren was also talking about things like Lifecycle and ORM, so to help you simplify your database interactions. And not only that, but it was backwards compatible to API 21. I don't know about you, but this is kind of how I felt. I am, you're talking about backwards compatibility and adding all these things, and I have to be honest, it took me a while to take the plunge, because I was like, I don't know that I want to be using all these things. Like, I don't know. Like, they're telling me how to write my code. I don't want them to tell me how to write my code. I want to write my code myself. So it took me a little bit to actually go and take the plunge. But then came I/O 2018, and at I/O 2018, they kind of told a different story about architecture components. In fact, what they did was they came up with a whole family, which is now called Jetpack. And this whole family of components basically helps you do things that took you forever to do in the past. Things like camera, for example, or you have things like in that family, you have architecture components, you have behavior, you have UI, you have foundations, and you can do things like camera, you can do things like Lifecycles, and you have app compat inside of it, you have multi-dexing, you even have emojis. Okay, so there's basically a component for everything. And that, to me, was something I could get behind of, because I remember watching that keynote and thinking, so they're telling me how to do something, but they're actually telling me how to do things the right way. Because so far, I had been working on so many projects where if someone was using the camera, for example, they'd be implementing camera 2 in a slightly different way than the way I would have implemented. Same thing with Lifecycle, same thing with everything, okay? I have never built an emoji application, but I remember feeling like whenever I jump into a project, it takes me a long time to actually learn how to work with that project. So if you could standardize, if you could tell me of a way to do things, that would just make my life easier. And it obviously would make the other developers' lives easier. But this is a lot, okay? Like, I completely appreciate there's a lot of information here. There's a lot of things, like we're even talking about auto and TV. So I feel like we should start slowly here. And I want to start slowly because I want everyone to be comfortable with the next thing I'm going to show. Because I'm sure that as an Android developer, you have seen this before. Like, this is an activity lifecycle, okay? So in an activity lifecycle, you have things like on start, on create, on pause, on destroy. So you have all these things that you can be listening to, and you know, like, what the state of your application is. Now, if you remember my previous slides, I talked about the saved instance. So let's go back to my previous slides here. And I talked about the save instance, okay? So in this case, I was building a game. I don't want to show you an entire game here because it will kind of like take us away from the whole point of this talk. What I want to do is I actually want to show you an application that is way more Play Store worthy. And this is a number generator. Now, as you can see in here, I have my create magic number application, and it calls the create magic number method on the onCreate. But I want to ask you a question. If I have my phone in front of me and I turn the phone, what happens to that number? Can anyone take a guess of what happens to the number? It changes. Yeah, exactly. And the reason why this number changes is, and this is completely expected, okay? Because what happens is, when you turn your phone sideways, this is called a configuration change. So what you're doing is, you're telling your application, hey, tear down, and we're gonna start again. Like, we're gonna call the onCreate again. So we destroy the application, and then we create it again. So it changes, okay? And, you know, I could have definitely added some shenanigans to my code here to say, hey, I just want to store this number on the onsaved instance. And then if I store that number on the onsaved instance, if I turn the phone, then it won't necessarily change. It's almost like you're storing that. Well, you are, in fact, storing that number. So you don't generate it every single time, okay? So you guessed correctly. That number will change every single time you turn your phone. And I said, yes, I could have stored this on the onsaved instance state. Does anyone know if the onsaved instance state has a limit to how much data you can store? You said 500? Yeah, it's actually 50 kilobytes. Okay, so you were. You know, that was it would have been good if it was that much. But I am going to read, so this is from the documentation, straight copies from the documentation. And I'm going to read that to you if you're on the back. So what the documentation says is, for the specific case of saved instance state, the amount of data should be kept small because the system process needs to hold on to the provided data for as long as the user can ever navigate back to that activity. We recommend that you keep saved state to less than 50K. So 50 kilobytes of data, okay? Now, when you're thinking about strings, 50 kilobytes of data is actually not like, it's actually a considerable amount, okay? But when you're doing things like calling APIs, for example, if you're doing something that is slightly more tricky or that you want to keep more data, then definitely you shouldn't be storing 50 kilobytes of data or more. And I say or more because you could, okay? So I know you said 512 kilobytes of data. I think you actually can do that. But the thing is, it becomes, it's not guaranteed that you're going to be able to read this data when it goes past 50 kilobytes of data. So the Android framework only guarantees 50 kilobytes of data. Okay. Now I want to show you a demo, and this is a really quick demo. Okay, but it's more of a real life kind of thing. So let me switch to my screen here and make sure you can also see that. Cool. So I have an application here. This is a really simple application. I'm sure you will have seen some of the stuff that I have in here, some of the dependencies. So I'm using retrofit because I'm calling an API. I'm also using glides because I'm loading images in here. But there's nothing special. Like I have nothing up my sleeves in here. And this is just as crap as it gets. I also have a data class for my results, so I'm going to be calling an API. So I have a data class, and you may have guessed right. I am gonna be fetching some Pokemons from the Pokemon API here. I have my Poke API, so this is all the basic retrofit that you may have seen in the past. And I have my main activity. So I didn't take a lot of care of like separating things in here because I wanted to show it to you, as quickly as I can. So I'm doing Pokemons.enqueue, and basically what I do in here is like I just tell the API, hey, give me some data. The API gives me some data. I listen to it. When I get a response, I show that on the screen. So let's go ahead and open my device in here and run this application and see what happens. So it fetches Pokemons, okay? As you guessed, it fetches Pokemons. It never goes above 20, so I'm only ever fetching 20 Pokemons because I want to be respectful to the API. Now, the other thing you will notice here is I'm doing a bunch of debugging on the bottom here because I want to make sure that you know that every single time I make an HTTP request, you see things in here, okay? So nothing special in here. In fact, I'm going to go and I'm going to clean this. Okay, so I'm going to remove this so you know there's nothing else. We've done the first request. We've got the Pokemons, and that's it. Now, if I go and turn the phone sideways, what happens is I make yet another request. And I'm going to clear this up again, and I'm going to turn the phone back, and I make yet another request. So again, this is only 20 Pokemons. It's not a lot of data, but every single time I make a request like this, I am fetching, I think it's 1.5K. So not a lot, but every single time I am actually doing that. So Jetpack comes with something that is really cool. In fact, that was announced during the architecture components, which is you can use Lifecycles. And what Lifecycles does is it actually takes care of the life cycles for you. So if you turn the phone and everything, it will deal with that. And I made some changes to my code, which I want to show you now. And this is Lifecycles. And now my application gets updated. It's got some red squigglies because it probably didn't update. So let's make sure we get all the latest updates in here. And I'm going to show you some other things I've added to this. So the first thing I've added to this is I've added the lifecycle extensions. So this is basically what helps you out with life cycles. If you have done something like MVVM in the past, for example, then the thing I'm going to show you now will just make it super simple for you. So I'm going to go into my view model. So I've created a view model for this application. So instead of fetching the Pokemons on the main activity, I actually have a view model. My view model is just one view model class that extends the view model. So this is what comes with the component. And what I have in here is I have a variable which I'm going to store a list of Pokemons. You should keep in mind I'm using mutable live data here. We're going to talk about mutable live data in just a second. So just bear with me. And then I have my get Pokemons methods, and then I have my load Pokemon. So basically, load Pokemons is what tells my codes to go into the API and load those Pokemons. I haven't made any changes to my Pokemon class. I haven't made any changes to my API. What I have done is instead of calling the Pokemons, instead of just doing the retrofit request directly from here, I'm actually going through my view model. So if I take this out of the way, I have my view model providers, and I'm saying just load the Pokemon view model, which is the class I have just created. And then what I do is I observe any changes to it. So I have a view model, and now I'm listening to any changes that happen into that. So if I go ahead and run this application again, I'll clear this out so you don't think I'm cheating. And the first time I run it, I'm actually going into the API, okay? This is absolutely expected because I want to make sure I always get fresh data. So I'm going to run this. As soon as it finishes running, I should get the same list of Pokemons, okay? So same thing. Now, what I wanted to pay attention to is when I turn my phone sideways, and again, I'm going to clear logcat. If I turn my phone sideways, I shouldn't be making an HTTP request anymore. Okay, so the thing that you're seeing in here is, yeah, it's just recycler view, just allocating some memory, but I'm not making HTTP requests anymore. And what I did here is like, it's super simple. Like I didn't have to write a lot of code. I was able to reuse most of my code. And I feel like this is a super powerful thing. Now let's go back to the slides and let's make sure you can see. Now, again, if you were paying attention, and I know I called this out, but if you were paying attention, you see that I use something like this on my code. And the thing I want you to look at is I actually use live data. So here's the bit where I'm actually using live data. So I'm returning live data, and then my recycler view just listens to that live data. And here's how live data works. Live data is also part of the Jetpack family. Here's how live data works. You have your UI, and then you have your live data object, which your UI is bound to. The UI then observes the live data object and listens to any kind of update. So anytime the live data object changes, the UI can also change. And then you have the API. So I'm using the Pokemon API in this case. So now what I can do is, whenever the Pokemon API changes, I can tell my live data. And then live data, because it's listening, it's bound to the API, live data gets updated. So when live data gets updated, my UI will also get updated, which is really cool, because my UI is now listening to it. And because my UI is bound to live data, then I get the new information on the screen. So I'm not doing anything special here. Like I'm using my recycler view the same way I would have used, but because I'm bound to live data, every single time the data changes, my UI also gets updated. So I don't need to do anything very special here. Now, you're probably thinking, well, yeah, so we've got all the Pokemons and everything. We've got a bunch of the Hacker Pikachus in there. But I want to be able to navigate. Like, I want to be able to tap on one of these things, and I want to be able to see, like, details about Pokemon. So I want to do something like this. And what is really cool about Jetpack is also navigation. Jetpack comes with navigation components. So if you want to navigate between fragments or between activities, you can do that using the navigation components. One really amazing thing about the navigation components for me is that you have a UI like this inside Android Studio. So you have your destinations, and you can basically, even if you have like very complex destinations where your UI goes from one place to the other, and it goes back and everything, you can create all this using this kind of interface. You can also do that with XML, okay? So, you know, the same kind of deal you do with views, you can also do that with XML. You can go into XML and you can do that. The really cool thing about the navigation components is not just that it helps you navigate, okay? But it handles the whole like backstack. So it handles when a user navigates back and forth between activities, and the application is able to keep track of all the data. So if you had loaded some data in a previous activity, the application keeps track of it. So you're not loading this data again, because you can combine Lifecycles and navigation. Now, a Pokemon application is also the perfect example for something called single activity, where you have one activity and you can just like swap between fragments. So you have a unique kind of activity, and you have a bunch of fragments, and you can navigate around them. There is, I'm not gonna talk about single activities in here. There is a really good talk by Ian Lake. So this is from Android Dev Summit last year. Ian Lake talks about single activities, how to use and how to actually take advantage of it. But this is the navigation component. There is a talk about navigation today, later today. I think it's at 5. So if you want to know more about navigation, then that's the talk to go to. But there's something in the navigation components which I really, really like, which is called safe args. And safe args, so here's the thing I do. Here's another story of something I do. I often go on Stack Overflow and I search for the most asked Android questions because I write a lot of blog content and I want to know what developers want to know because I want to try and help them out. So I go on Stack Overflow and I search for the most asked questions. And this is what I did a few weeks back. And I found this, and I'm going to read the question for you. How do I pass data between activities in an Android application? I'm sure you've all done that. Like, I'm sure you've done, like, you know, you're probably thinking, well, I could use intents or stuff. But looking at this question, what was very eye-opening to me is I looked at this question, and I looked at the answers because surely there could only be, like, a couple of answers, maybe 3 answers. But you look at the answers, and the list just keeps on going and going and going and going. And what's happening here is there's people talking about you can pass your data via intents, for example. Like when you start a new intent, you can pass your data. You can do things, and this has 3 pages, by the way. Okay, so this is like one long scroll, but this has 3 pages. So there's 2 more pages with a lot of scrolling like this. But there's people talking about passing data through activities. There's people talking about storing data on a database and then retrieving on the other activity. There's people talking about shared preferences here. Oh yeah, just store that in shared preferences and read it back. So there's quite a few ways people are doing this. And again, this goes back to Android just gives you so many ways to do things that you just do. You just end up doing things your own way. You know, who's done any kind of SQLite in the past, and like who's seen a SQLite class, and there's so many different ways you can do it. Now, safe args, and this is a really good description of what safe args actually does. So safe args generates classes based off of our navigation graph to ensure type-safe access to arguments for destinations and actions. So your actions is basically you're moving from a place to another, and your destination is the place that you wanna go to. So it's and this is really like where navigation components. I don't want to be unfair, but this is where I think it shines because it helps you out, because it actually generates some type-safe classes that help you out passing this data. So this is a quote by Laila Fujiwara. Laila is actually speaking here today, but it's the best description in my opinion. And I wanted to show you like roughly how you do that, because yeah, so it generates some classes and everything. How does, what is that? This is how you do that. So in my example, I have my navigation component, and this is my XML. So this is the thing that gets generated by that fancy UI I showed you earlier. And what I can do is I can create arguments. And again, I can do this via the interface, or I can do this via XML. So you start by defining the arguments that you want to have passed into destination. So in this case, I wasn't feeling super creative. I said my argument is called name. The default value is null. Like if there's no value, then just pass a null. And it's a string. So this is again, the type-safe stuff that I talked about. You could have passed an integer here. Then what you do is, when you rebuild your project, you will have now a directions class. And this directions class, you can actually get an instance of. This is generated for you, okay? So you don't need to go and write those. And in this case, I'm updating the name of my Bulbasaur. So this was the first Pokemon on the list. So I update the name of my Bulbasaur, and then I call navigate, passing that information. So very similar to the stuff that you would have done with fragments or like with activities. Then in your receiving destination, so this is where you're going to, you can just use get arguments, and then you read those arguments. But again, what is the beauty of it is like this is all type safe, which is kind of amazing. And the navigation then works something like this. Okay, so I have my Bulbasaur. I can tap on the Bulbasaur, and you see that this is now called something else. I'm only updating this for the Bulbasaur. I'm not updating for any other Pokemons, and you can see that I'm updating that on the fly, okay? Now, the thing that I'm not doing here is I'm only updating this when you navigate. If you go back, like this doesn't get stored anywhere. Like I'm only, this is only me updating the name when you navigate to something if you wanna, if you wanna see the name of the Pokemon in a different way. Now, this is where Room comes in. And again, remember when I talked about SQLite and SQLite classes and like all these different ways you can use SQLite. And at one point I kind of gave up on SQLite, and I'm like, I'm going to use Realm, because Realm, like there's one way of doing it. And I think Realm is amazing, but Room actually solves that issue, because I'm not going to say there's only one way. I'm sure like you're all like smart and creative people, and you're going to find a different way to use Room. But what it does is it's a standardized way of getting database access. Okay, so it's like Florina's description here is great. So it's a persistence library that provides an abstraction layer for SQLite. Okay, so it's not doing anything super clever in here, but it's just an abstraction layer. So you don't need to go and write that code. You add a library into your application, and you can start using. Now, how would you do that? I showed you my Pokemon class earlier today, and my Pokemon class has only two things on it. There's a name and there's a URL. So this is the stuff that I'm getting from the API. I get a Pokemon name and I get a URL for this Pokemon. The changes I can make into this class, and then again, this is my data class, okay? So I'm only making some changes. I'm like refactoring here. So the changes I'm making is, I'm telling what table name I want to store this. So I'm saying I want to store this on the Pokemon's table. And I'm also adding a few things, like I can set a primary key here. So I'm actually setting a primary key to Pokemon ID, because my data itself doesn't come with an ID. So I want to be able to, when I store that on a table, I want to be able to query that. So I want to be able to set an ID for it. And you can say auto-generate, and it just generates a unique number every single time. And then the next thing I'm doing is I'm just creating an interface, and the interface is my data access object. This is the thing I'm actually going to use to read data from the database. And Room is clever enough that it knows that if you're doing any of the CRUD, like if you're doing creates or updates or deletes, Room is smart enough that you can just say, hey, this is an insert, and it will just do it for you automatically. Which is kind of cool. But you can also do queries, okay? So if you actually want to write some custom queries, you can do queries. In this case, I have one here, which is a select star from Pokemons, where name like name. The very interesting thing about this is also using an annotation processor. So the very interesting thing that this thing does is, if you look at my table where I do my select from Pokemons, my table name is Pokemons. If I were to make a typo here and call it Pokemon instead, Android Studio will tell me, oh, hey, this is not called Pokemons. This is not called Pokemon. It's called Pokemons, which I think is really cool. Like, this is it's checked at compile time. So if you make a mistake, it will tell you. Like, it won't let you run the application. And then obviously I can change it back, and that disappears. Okay, so the squiggly lines disappear, and now you can look at your codes. And then there's one more thing I need to do, which is I need to create my database. So we need to implement our database. We were only like implementing one entity so far, which was the Pokemon's table with the CRUD in it. Now we're just going to implement the database. This is an abstract class, which I called Pokemon Database. And in this case, it is extending from the Room database. So this is a class that comes with Room. And then I'm just creating an abstract function, an abstract method called Pokemon DAO. And it returns a Pokemon DAO type. So now what I can do in my code is I can end up with code like this. I have my repository in here. You can, I feel like a lot of us, if we're dealing with data, we're probably using repositories. If we're not, then we can just create a repository in this case, which is what I did. And then the important part in here is you create a repository or you change your repository, and you make sure that that implements your DAO. And the next thing is you just initialize your database. So it's kind of that simple. Now let's look at how this works. I am going to go ahead and switch to my room branch. And I'll show you some of the things I did in here, okay? Because I wanted to clean up. So I have added the room. So I had navigation in here as well. So I was basically like building this application in steps, okay? So I did my navigation on it, and then I did my, my room stuff. So I've added the room libraries in them. Then my view model didn't really change. So I'm still like just reading data on the view model. My Pokemon class is, let's make sure we click the elephant in here. So my Pokemon class has some data, so it's got some extra stuff like I showed you before, like I have my table name and I have Pokemons in here. I have my primary key. And I have another class for Pokemon details as well, but this is not important in here. Then the other thing I want to show you is my Pokemon DAO. So my Pokemon DAO is doing all the heavy lifting here, okay? So I'm basically just telling everyone, hey, this is my DAO. I want to do things like I want to delete, I want to do select, I want to insert. Like I just want to be able to do all the things in here. But this is what my Pokemon DAO ended up looking like. And then let's just look at the repository real quick. On the repository is, let me take this off the way for a bit. On the repository, I'm saying, hey, I want to name this database because like if I'm debugging, for example, I want to be able to like look at the database. So I called it Pokemon DB. I'm initializing my Pokemon database, just like I said I was going to do, okay? And I have my inserts, my updates, and this is where I actually go ahead and call the Pokemon DAO and do the inserts. And I'm doing this as a background task. So you must make sure that you're doing this in the background. You're not doing it on the main thread. So I'm just using async task here, and I'm doing this as a background task. And the last thing I'm doing is I have my, because I'm now using navigation here, I have my Pokemon list. And on my Pokemon list, what I do is I just have my model, which is my view model, like I said before. And I'm observing, so I'm just I've got an observer on the get Pokemons, which is my thing that goes and gets the Pokemon details, and that's pretty much it. So now if I run this application, why does that open every time? Again, it's going to do one request to the API. It's going to do a one-time request to the API. I can turn my phone, and it shouldn't make any extra requests because it's using Lifecycles. It is also using navigation, okay? I am going to go and I'm going to click Bulbasaur here. And this Bulbasaur, because I already have a database and I've already clicked on Bulbasaur, I've added these buttons to the bottom that is make my pet, and I can make or I can make it not my pet. So if I go back in here and click on Bulbasaur again, because it's fetching from the database now, then it is not my pet anymore. So it goes into the API and it gets the data from there. Now, if I go and click make my pet, and then again, this is live data again, okay? Like I'm changing this screen. I'm not doing anything special to change the screen. I'm just listening to live data. My screen is bound to live data. So whenever that changes, it just goes and gets the data for you. And all this code is on GitHub, okay? Like I'm going to be publishing my slides later and everything. But all this code is on GitHub. So if you want to look at how I did, and like if you want to make comments on my code, if you want to do some code review for me, then yeah, that's totally fine. Now, going back to the slides. I wanted to close this with just a few things because I feel like this is a very kind of like bird's eye overview of what the components are. I definitely didn't talk about every single component here. I didn't talk about emojis, for example. I know Florina has a good talk about emojis, so you can find that on YouTube. But some of the talks that you may, if you are interested, or if there's stuff that you want to get more, like deeper into, then there's some of the talks today and tomorrow that you can go and see. So there's implements in the paging library. This is today, and that's I think it's going to be a very kind of like in-depth talk about the paging library. There's getting to know CameraX. CameraX is amazing. I wanted to show you one example of CameraX here. CameraX is amazing. Like I said, I used to do a lot of camera stuff in the past, and it was a pain. CameraX is like, when I first learned about CameraX at Google I/O, I was like, I need to try this, and I tried it, and it took me like 15 minutes to have a camera application running, and I think it's amazing. So the library itself does a lot of heavy lifting for you. So if you want to learn about CameraX, there's this talk tomorrow at 9:50, and then if you want to learn more about Room or database, and this is, as far as I know, this is a kind of a mixture between Room and SQLite. Which also uses Room in the backend. You can go to select start from Kotlin, which happens tomorrow at the same time. So you need to make a choice in here. With that, I want to thank you very much for your time. My name is Marcos Placona. I will be around here both days. If you have any questions, come and talk to me. I also have some Kotlin stickers if you want some Kotlin stickers. I don't work for Kotlin or JetBrains or anything, but I made some stickers. So if you want some stickers, let me know. Thank you very much.